So I think most of us will agree that a good score can give a good game that little extra to really make it shine. Our next speakers are here to share how they tackle that challenge. So please welcome Disasterpeace and Peter Curry.
Hello.
Hi.
It's good to see so many people here. We're really thrilled to be here and really excited to talk a little bit about this project that we worked on for a couple years.
Yeah, it should be good. I had to dig into the I haven't worked on the audio for about a year now, so I had to rediscover it all for this talk, which was fun.
Peter was frantically going through the code for the game and making sure he understood all the things that we did so that we'd be prepared.
On the flight here.
Same for me, too. Because this game is a bit unusual in its process in that we spent a lot of time just trying all kinds of weird stuff. And so we just spent months creating lots of weird little features that I kind of forgot about and had to revisit.
Yes, yeah, the audio definitely became a lot more entangled with the game than we ever expected.
So, my name is Rich Freeland. I make music under the name Disasterpeace. I'm a freelance sound artist from Los Angeles, California. This is Peter Curry.
Yeah, and I'm a software developer. I'm in Wellington, New Zealand. I've worked at a studio as a programmer for 4.5 or so years, making a whole bunch of games that you'll never will have heard of. Then I've done indie stuff since 2006. Oh, you've lost the slides.
What happened? Okay.
Yeah, on and off, but the first game that I ever got anywhere with was Mini Metro. So this is, so my brother and I worked on a prototype for the game, which is what you're seeing here. So this is one that we built in a weekend. It was designed as sort of like an interactive subway map, in a way. So it's kind of a stripped-down version of SimCity, where all you're caring about is building the lines to connect the stations, and the stations open up as the game advances automatically. Hopefully soon there we go. So then you just edit lines to try to get the passengers around. So we worked on this in April 2013, and very, very quickly decided that we wanted to turn it into a commercial release. And the one thing we didn't have, the reason we came up with the idea for a subway map game was because we didn't have any artists with us, and this was the first time we actually figured, well, how do we make a game without any artists? But the one thing we also didn't have was any audio, but we definitely had an idea for the audio in the game. So then one thing led to another, and we got in touch with Rich.
Yeah, so what did you guys want?
Yeah, so I remember, because we always had this idea for procedural audio, so we didn't want just a scored track or anything. We wanted a soundscape, an ambience soundscape that was all derived from all of the in-game actions, passengers appearing, stations appearing, all of that, all of the actions that happen in the game. And Rich was the go-to guy at that point because you'd done your January.
I was the go-to guy, but you had another fellow who you were working with.
Oh yeah, we did. I mean, there was
your first
a
choice.
Way. Yeah, there was actually a really. There was a great guy locally who was really into procedural audio, so we actually had him all set to go, but then one thing led to another, and that didn't happen. So
you guys found this game I worked on called January
which was all fully procedural.
Yeah. So I made this little game called January where you walk around and you're a little character and it snows and you lick the snowflakes and it generates music, and the music is always different every time you play, and I think that was kind of like, we can do something like that.
That was definitely, that was one of the things that we wanted to imbue our game with, was to have this thing where you have control over the audio, but still the audio has to sound good as well, right? So
of course. The audio has to sound good.
So I remember once...
You don't learn anything from this talk. So my vision for the game I played the game and got really excited about the prospect of working on it, and I kind of saw this, this idea of, oh, it'd be really cool if the entire audio experience is kind of like, it's kind of like a sonic symbiosis. And what I mean by that is that like the music and the sound effects and the audio, it all kind of behaves as a singular entity. So you can't really tell the difference between, the sounds of passengers getting on trains and the trains moving and the UI and stuff. It all kind of just seamlessly blends into a singular experience. And so the way that I wanted to go about doing that was to create one-to-one analogies. And what I mean by that is like trains, passengers, all these things are like very important objects in the world, and that they'd have a certain language attached to them that was always the same. And so one of the things that we'll show like over time that we figured out is that like you have all these different kinds of passengers and stations, which if I go back real quick, you can kind of see. So you have like, these are stations, the outlined circles and squares and triangles are stations that have different shapes, and then the passengers also have shapes. The passenger shape dictates where they want to go. So this little square guy is getting picked up to go because he wants to go to the square station. And so there was like a consistent language there. And so tapping into that, like, how can we create a consistent language with the audio? And so we'll get into where that took me. But basically each shape would have a specific kind of sound attached to it, and that goes a pretty long way in kind of establishing the language of the system. And so the other thing that was really important for me was, I knew that the audio had to have carry emotional weight, and it had to make the experience of playing this game, which I think on the surface can feel fairly meditative, but the longer you play the game, the more elaborate and complicated the subway system gets, and the harder it gets to manage your actions, and so it can actually get a little bit stressful. Would you agree?
Yes, that's kind of the way the game's designed, really. But very early on, I remember I sent you an email, Rich, about what our high-level aims for the audio was, and one of the things we wanted was that the audio would be like listening to the engine, so you can tell when it's going well and when something's going wrong. So we definitely wanted it to be in like a game aid almost, like
right.
Like if you could watch the game but also hear the game to get an idea of how well you're playing.
And I kind of wanted to take that idea, but also I wanted to be able to diffuse some of the stress that the game creates so that the player doesn't get too overwhelmed. And so we went to great lengths to make sure certain things like the sound of when you have a station that has too many passengers in it and the passengers start jumping like, hey, look at me, if you don't pick these passengers up soon, the game will end. Those sounds we iterated on quite a bit to make sure that they weren't too stressful. Like we didn't want, loud, like look at me, it had to be like kind of subtle. And so utility was really important. Utility in terms of, there's all this information happening. You have passengers moving around. You're connecting different train stations to each other with different lines and stuff. The utility of how all these things interact is really important. And so it became really important to try to create a hierarchy of, like passengers getting on trains, passengers getting off trains. Which one of those things is more important? And so that's one of the things that we had to figure out just over the course of like prototyping. And so utility first, and then the emotional stuff, which was also important, but I wanted that to come in underneath as a secondary objective. So that was kind of my like initial plan for the soundtrack.
But before all of that, so we released the game in early access in Steam. Do you want to go back?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so we released the game in early access in Steam a long time before the audio. In fact, it was only a couple of months after we got in touch with you, I think. Just for financial concerns, it isn't why I would ever recommend releasing a game early, but worked out okay for us. We were expecting to get a pretty toxic reception, but thankfully we didn't really get too many comments like this one. And overall, the game was actually really well received on Steam. But
there's always going to be at least one person who has, who has a
yeah.
problem with whatever you could possibly imagine doing.
Yeah, but we didn't have audio in the build, so that was in.
So we went on Greenlight in 2014.
Greenlight
March.
2014, and then released in early access in August 2014, and it was still maybe not quite a year, maybe just over a year. I can't remember until we actually had audio.
The game was in Greenlight for over a year with no audio, and so there was a small but vocal audience of people who were really intrigued and maybe frustrated.
Yeah, it's always the problem when you've got missing features in early access. Like we actually had a lot of people who were like complaints like, how come the sound's not on, and I haven't gotten the audio yet, and it, because it didn't have any audio for so long, it gave people a lot of a lot of time to think about what the audio could be like when it was in, especially once we said that Disasterpeace was.
So there were a lot of people who had ideas that they wanted to share.
Yeah, and once you've allowed your fans to gestate their ideas for long enough time, like there's no way you can ever meet their expectations. So,
but we chose not to put audio in it for a while because the system that we were trying to build was so not a traditional we'll put some loops of music in there and we'll just iterate on it. It's kind of this thing where the system didn't really work until it worked. So we spent like a year before it got to the point where I felt comfortable, I think.
Yeah, we couldn't sort of iterate in front of everyone.
I mean, we probably could have, but we chose not to.
It would have scared some people. It's hard enough iterating the game in early access, let alone this experimental audio thing.
It's tough because every day the system would be in a different state of being because it's so volatile and just iterative programming all the time. So one day the system might be working really great, and the next day it's completely broken, and so it didn't really make sense. People wanted to mute the sound and the music separately, which we had to tell them is not
We've
possible.
just got just inherently to the way the audio is done in the game, we just have an audio on or off, and we always get people asking, I just want to switch off the sound. It's like, well, what's sound and what's music?
Right.
But
So I started getting into an early audio prototyping phase where I just tried to figure out, what is this going to look like? And so one of the earliest ideas I had was, what if the music in the game was a representation of a week in the life of a commuter? And so the reason that I thought of this is that the game runs on a weekly clock. Every hour goes by. It was 0.8 seconds per hour or something. So it's tick, 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 tick. And then at the end of the week, you get a screen that kind of tells you your progress, and you get upgrades to your system. You can buy tunnels to go underwater. You can add trains and carriages to your system. You can add new lines to your system. So I was thinking about it in this very modular way. So what if we had music that would represent a week in the life of the commuter? So this is kind of an very early prototype. I actually just realized, do we have sound? This guy? No, but that's okay.
knowing Audio Talk has audio.
All right. Let's see if this works.
Hey, that sounds like Fizz.
Shut up. Saturday they're hungover. Lose sense of time and place. And we're awake. So that didn't really end up like this at all, but it was a really important exercise early on to kind of start to experiment with what the aesthetics will be of the game, and kind of the kind of feelings that the sound should give you emotionally. So that was a really important exercise. And here's another early audio prototype that actually, I believe this one has that track laid underneath it, but it's kind of quiet. So initially I was thinking, you know, I'll add all these like procedural elements on top of like a set piece of music so that you kind of get the best of both worlds. Ultimately we ended up doing that, but here's one of the first prototypes where I basically took some footage from the game and I threw it into my music sequencer Logic and just started like putting sounds to it and trying to figure out what things will sound like and how will the systems interact sonically. It's a bit messy, but started experimenting with the idea of having the lines kind of be electrified, and that was these like long drawn out tones that were kind of supposed to represent the different lines, and when you draw them they kind of come alive and you start to hear them. And then having like trains on the lines that have an engine sound where the engine would actually be pitched to the line, and just starting to figure out like, you know, like some of the analogies there.
Yeah, I remember early on you worked on that spreadsheet or whatever of just like all of the possible things you could use, all of the game events and game information you could use to, and how you make the audio.
There was a very long list of like potential ideas that we had about how systems can interact with each other, which we won't bore you with.
I remember the first time I saw that document, I was like, oh my goodness, this guy's going overboard.
So here's another early audio prototype, and this one I'm starting to figure out those analogies and trying new ideas. So this one has an idea in it that's a little hard to hear, but it was an idea that I was really keen on early. It was this idea called train beat, and the idea was that you'd have, so in the game, you know, you have these trains that go to station, they pick up passengers, and when the passengers get picked up, they show up in the train as a little shape, and usually they can hold 6. And so my idea was that when the train is moving and it has passengers in it, the number of passengers in the train and their position in the train could be performed like a sequencer. So if it's like seat 1 has a guy in it, seat 2 doesn't have a passenger, seat 3 does, seat 4 does, and then 5 and 6 don't, that'd be like bop, 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 and let's just like keep going all around the system. We didn't end up using that, but you can see a little bit in this video. Starting to experiment with like more rhythmic elements. So that's like the sound of the little square passenger in the train. Little circle guy. The sound of like new stations appearing was something that I kind of figured out really early. It seemed to work well. Like when a new station appears, it's really important that the player knows that it's there. Before, it was easy to lose track of stations. So to have a loud sound that's like, hey, there's a new station, it's not connected to your system, you gotta add.
Yeah, that was one part where the audio helped really early on, because there was always a complaint here, like, I didn't realize this thing had appeared, and having that big boom.
So I think at this point in the prototyping phase, I think I felt pretty confident that, okay, this is probably going to work. It needs it needs to be worked with and massaged to do the right things all the time. But in theory, it should work out okay. Now we just have to figure out how the hell are we going to do this? How are we going to program this?
Yeah, to scale this up from a prototype that was done in
because this was something I just did in a sequencer, in Logic Pro. So it's all a facade. Okay, I think you get the idea. So yeah, I mean, early on, I was really kind of wrestling with these two ideas, which is on one end of the spectrum, you have the arbitrary choices, which to me are like the choices where you just make a decision because it's creative and you like it and it feels right. And then the other side of the spectrum was, we have all this game data, and I really feel like it's important that the data is expressed creatively and in a way that the player can hopefully begin to comprehend some of the things that are happening in the system. And so so I mean, my thought was like, I want to find the sweet spot where we're doing both. So like the experience sonically will be highly curated, and what I mean by that is like I'm setting up the system with very specific restraints so that it has a certain quality to it. Like one of the things the system does is it has it plays different chord progressions in different cities and stuff, and those chord progressions, it moves through them in a way that there's a lot of variety, but it's also somewhat predictable and it always sounds good. So things like that were definitely, I was spending lots of time thinking about. So we knew we wanted to do a quantized system, and what I mean by that is a system where everything fires on a grid. All the events are happening on rhythmic increments. But we had to figure out, how to do that. And so we started looking for tools. Mini Metro was made in Unity.
Yeah. This is when it was starting to get a bit over my head as well, because you started throwing around these. You really had to be in charge of figuring out what exactly we wanted for the tech side. Even though I'd be the one doing most of the integration, I didn't really know what exactly we were after.
Yeah, I don't think I did either. So we just kind of went about blindly, and the first thing that we discovered was this plugin for Unity called G Audio, and it does stuff. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so in theory it's a procedural. Does granular synthesis. I had to look up what that was.
Procedural sample-based music sequencer.
Yeah, there we go. So it's not really built for
games.
For games. It's not really built for exactly what we wanted it to do. Like it seems it sort of built to do background music that doesn't interact exactly with the game. Like
yeah. And it was unwieldy.
Yeah. Well, it's really good at what it does. I mean, what it does, it can it
was very esoteric and not because it wasn't designed for what we needed it to. Initially I really struggled with it because I was trying to basically fit a square block in a round hole.
It did exactly what we wanted it to do, but how it integrated with Unity and how it expected to be used wasn't exactly right. So we had to figure out how to.
Yeah. So there was a time period where I was like, "Oh, this is really frustrating."
It was frustrating because it almost was perfect for us, but it was
but
just
in certain ways it was so frustrating to use. So we tried to use Fmod for a while, if you're familiar with Fmod, which is like audio middleware tools, and that was even less friendly because that system is not designed with this sort of musical, like everything's quantized. It's not designed for that and the front end environment. And I really wanted I was really trying to find a blend of workflow and performance. So where the workflow is really helpful and easy for me to get into and be creative, but also that it does the thing that we need it to do at the end of the day.
Yeah, because Fmod was really good at just providing game audio, but what G Audio was really good at was being able to precisely do
things on musical
schedule sounds with subframe accuracy to make sure they're exactly on the beat.
So we went back to G Audio, and Peter was extremely helpful in helping to deconstruct it to do only the things that we really needed it to do. So we took out all the unnecessary components, and we ditched the UI, like it had a UI for Unity. We got rid of that. We just focused on the things that it does best, which are scheduling events to happen on musical increments and basic sample playback.
Just the way we had to the main thing we had to figure out was how to integrate it with the game, so it would schedule samples based on what the game was asking it to do.
From like a designer standpoint, like doing some of the scripting and stuff, it was really cool because basically it was like, what if you had an update loop, and instead of doing things by the frame, you're doing them every eighth note or every triplet or whatever, and that was really fun to create like modules and stuff in that environment. And so we built it out to have what we need, and so that was a lot of front end behaviors that I built in C#, and then a lot of back end stuff that Peter built. Oh yeah. Whoops. I said all that. Okay, and then began the long, arduous journey of perpetual iteration. So I think Peter and I had a little kind of a different approach, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end. But I think Peter's more about like having actual results that are like measured. And my approach was more like we'll just keep doing stuff and tweaking it until it's right. And so,
well, it's funny. Like often when I talk about early access development, I say how it can be quite a scary thing to design, to have a game that you're still designing while it's in early access, because most game players aren't familiar with the iteration, like the scale of iteration you have to do with game design. And but and I always say that in a way like I understand the iteration that has to happen, but then while talking about this just over the last few days with Rich, I realized I wasn't comfortable with Rich's iteration just because it was out of my control. So
we kind of just set me off in a direction, and I just did a bunch of stuff for a long time. It was a very long phase of just iterating, figuring out what works and what doesn't, just trying things at the most basic level, like, I want to make the trains be a little sequencer, like that train beat idea I was talking about. So I just built it and tried it in the game and realized that, this isn't something that contributes to the game being easier to parse. It's actually just adding more information that the player doesn't necessarily need. So,
and at that point, my role was basically adding little bits of the little connections between the game information and the audio system. So making sure that if you wanted to experiment with something, you could actually get the information out of the game.
So, I mean, going back to the analogy thing, we started kind of getting into the concrete objects of the system and figuring out, how to prioritize these and how to make it so that there's a language that people understand. And so, I had this idea for lines, that the lines are electric, and that the lines kind of dictate a lot of the things that happen. The lines are made up of living sequences, so it's all based on game data. So things like the timbre. So what you have is you have a line. Each line in the system has an inherent pitch to it and a rhythm, and those things can all change. But then each individual, like if the sequence is like bum 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 bum, if you have 4 stations on that line and they're all different shapes, then you'll have like 4 slightly different versions of that. So it'll be like bum bim bum 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 bim bum bum. So the timbre's changing based on the stations that are on the line. The volume of each pulse will be different depending on the number of peeps are passengers. That's like our lingo for passengers because they're cute. Peep. So peeps at a station against the capacity of that station. There are some upgrades where you can like make the stations have more peeps. So, if there's a lot, it'll be loud, and if there's a little bit, it'll be quiet. And so that kind of contributes to the sound. So, beam, bum, boom, boom, beam, bum, and it's always changing based on, how many passengers you have waiting, and so it kind of gives you a very subtle cue as to what your system is doing. And the pitch of each line is different, and it's predetermined based on sequences that I kind of laid out for every level. Every different city has like a harmonic progression, so it'll move from, it might move from this major chord to this minor chord or whatever, and it does it in a way that's very fluid, because the oldest line will get the oldest line will change pitches to become the newest line. It's kind of hard to explain, and there's so much to talk about that we're trying to breeze through some of these topics, but I'm happy to talk about that more if you want to talk to me. Behavior. Right, so this is what I'm trying to explain. Pitch changes when line least recently changed is changed. So that's kind of a mouthful. It took us forever for you to finally, for us to understand that together. Rich was trying to explain to me,
This is a very when you edit the oldest line, then you upgrade the harmony index and whatever.
Remember I showed that range, that gamut from arbitrary to data? This is way on the arbitrary scale, where it's like I just decided that this was the right decision to propel the system forward. So you basically get the sense that, this is a moving piece of music that's changing periodically, and the period is just when you've moved a certain number of lines, when you've changed the line that was least recently changed.
Okay. For some reason, it was one of those. In theory, it should be really straightforward, but for us to communicate successfully the idea and me to implement in code accurately took forever.
So the rhythm, though, is something that changes whenever you change a line. So each city, it has a set of rhythms that are tied to it. So if let's see if I can do this. So if this is the pulse, a city like Paris might have like these rhythms available. Da da. Or da 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 da. Like all these, basically an array of potential rhythms, and each city would have its own array to give each city a slightly different feel. And whenever you change a line, the rhythm of that line will change. And so you have all these, as you build the system up, you have these different lines that have a slightly different character to them. And that was another one of the more arbitrary decisions that we could have tied it more to game data. And when I was going back through this to do the talk, I was like, I should have made this more tied to game data, but okay, it's okay. And then when you place the line, there's some sounds that are tied to the pitch of the line. So when you're using your finger or whatever to create a new line, and it'll choose a pitch like bum, and then it'll just have like a tone that's going until you lock it in place, and then the pulse dun bing bum will start going, and it's all in the same pitch. Oops. I forgot to do that first. Whee! Okay, so oops. So trains. Trains are, the idea that we settled on was that trains would be electrified by the lines, so that this idea that the lines kind of control a lot of the things underneath them. So the trains have different kinds of engines that are available, and these are just like looping engine sounds, like, and if the train is empty, you just get like a. And whenever it picks up once it has at least one passenger in the train, it switches from like a noise-based sound to a tonal sound. So if the line is going bing, bum, boom, boom, there's a train going on it with no passengers in it going and then when it picks up a passenger, it goes chugga 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 chugga, and it all kind of becomes part of this. It becomes like an instrument, or that was the idea. And so the different engines can have different timbres just to mix it up, different rhythmic qualities, like a chicka 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 chicka, or chicka 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 chicka, or cha 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 cha, or whatever. And we tried a lot of stuff with the trains, but ultimately decided to make it really simple, relatively speaking. And maybe it still sounds a little complicated, but it's not as complicated as some of the other things. Right, so this is what I just said. Oh, so when they stop to pick up a passenger, they'll go shh. So that became a very important piece of language, and just explaining, that a train has stopped and is picking up passengers. If a train only does that when it picks up passengers, because it can stop and not pick up passengers, right? So if it does that, you don't get a shh. And this all happens in time too. So on the hour, I believe, in the game, which would be on like the downbeat.
The train stopping are the one thing that can happen anytime.
Oh, okay. But the actual sound is quantized anyway.
Right.
So in general, like the visual stuff on screen and the sound are completely synced to each other. But in this case, we were able to kind of blur it a little bit. So the trains can pick up and drop off whenever, right? Or is it just dropping off?
It's just when they stop.
Yeah, okay. Just when the train stops can happen whenever, but the actual exhaust sound is always firing on a musical increment. And there are some unique engines. There's a level, Kyoto, which has a Shinkansen, which is like a really fast train. I saw someone go, yeah, Shinkansen. So that has like a special sound, and those move faster. And that was one of the things we got into later in development. We wanted certain levels to have their own unique feel, and some of those things were gameplay, and some of those were sonic choices that I made. Yay. Oops. Yeah. So those are the sound. I'm gonna play that again because that was kind of. So those are kind of the sounds for when a new station appears. Each one of those sounds has like a unique element that's tied to the verb for station appear. But then there's also an element that says this is a triangle, or this is a square, or this is a circle. So the square is kind of like a kind of thing, and the circle is kind of like a, and the triangle is kind of like a tss. And that language carries over into the passengers themselves. So when a little passenger appears, you just get like the sound like by itself. And so this was one of the early things. I don't know, maybe it wasn't too early, but this became really important that shapes have like a percussive sound tied to them. It became important in like describing creating like a language for the environment. So each shape has a unique percussive sound. I got to remember not to get ahead of the slides. I keep doing this. So the shape information is passed on to the line. So if you have a line and it has a triangle, a square, and a circle on it, and the line is doing that bing, bam, boom, boom, it's getting that information from the stations to say, what kind of stations, what kind of station are you? And okay, so you're a triangle, you're a square, you're a circle, so I know that I need a sequence that's 3 pitches long, and the first one is going to play this like triangle version of the pitch, which is like bing, or the square version, which is bum, etc.
Yeah, that's actually really helpful information for someone who's playing the game as well. Like, the worst thing you want is like if you've got circle, 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 circle on a line, that's bad. So you can actually hear that now.
Yeah, what's interesting is that in the beginning, the system is made up primarily of the primary shapes, which are the circle, the square, and the triangle. But as the system evolves, you start to get different kinds of stations that are kind of reflective of different kinds of points of interest in a city. Like you might get like a star, or like a cross, which is like a hospital, basically. And those sounds are slightly more noticeable. So in the general like landscape of the music / sound, you start to hear these like little new sounds that are, like you might have a hospital way on the left side of the screen, and then so you'll start hearing like a little like different kind of sound on the left side of the screen that I think just helps to draw attention to that as the player. Behavior. So stations can spawn and they can also mutate. They can change. 5 minutes? Oh, that's not as bad. Okay. There's also a bass sound that will play underneath when one of these stations appears, and that's just to kind of give a sense of the system moving. All right, I'm going to have to move really quickly now. So then there's peeps. So those are some examples of peeps. They take they use the shape system. We're not going to have time to talk about that, so I'll skip that. So when they spawn, there's a percussive sound. When they get on a train, they make a sound that's tonal to match the line. So if the line is boom, then the sound will be boop, and the same pitch to kind of make that more cohesive. When you disembark, there's no sound because we decided that wasn't as important to the player. Sound effects. I hope you like sine waves. I basically took really simple sine waves plus this tool called S-Layer, which kind of just randomizes a bunch of parameters, and you get really interesting results with it. And so I created almost all these sound effects using sine waves. So here's some examples of those. Those are just a couple. Cities are not the same, so we had to build a loadout system. Man, we're not going to get to any of this stuff. We had to build a loadout system where each city has unique variations. There's different harmonic progressions for different cities, different rhythms available. You can change keys. You can give it like a set of keys to choose from. You can change the attack time of sample. So instead of boom, it's like whoosh. So certain levels have like a much more like ambient sound to them. I think like Sao Paulo is like really ambient, which is kind of cool. And you can also change it when the game is paused or fast forward. Different engine types. You can do swing. You can swing things if you like jazz. You can add one-off things like Berlin has a kick drum because why not? And it goes on and on. And then we had some charts for loadout, but we're not going to be able to get through this stuff.
This basically represents when we were going from Rich just hacking around in C# to try and get into a
template, to building a template, right?
Data-driven format, so Rich could easily still experiment, but it was all a lot more controlled.
And then we have different pulses that we were using. We're not really going to talk about that. Synchronization. This will all be online.
I guess that we could just get into the main issue with for game design. For game development for us, when we started to have to synchronize we had this pulse running in the audio thread that was running at exactly the same frequency as the hours ticked by in the game, because that was all controlled in the audio thread, and that the audio thread just advances regardless of what's happening in the game. To try and synchronize the main thread and how the game's actually updating with that audio thread was quite a bit of work. I'm not sure what. We can't go through all of this right now, so I'm not sure what the most important.
This is a basic flow chart of how stuff works. It goes in, and you can put a bunch of different modules into it, and then it makes sound. You're not really going to get to talk about that stuff. Damn. Game entities. Okay, so the game doesn't run without the audio engine, which was kind of a bad thing.
Yeah, because the game relies on synchronizing with the audio thread before it starts. So it makes sure that when it starts, it's starting at the exact time that a pulse is activated on the audio thread. I didn't check to see whether it actually worked without an audio thread. So the first time we pushed an audio build up, a handful of people that for some reason didn't have an audio card or audio was disabled in the system or whatever, the game just would sit there and not start.
And really late in development, we decided that we needed a twice as fast mode. And so we had built all this stuff, and then we had to go back and figure out okay, now how do we change the tempo on the fly? And it was a bit of a head scratcher. But we figured it out.
Yeah.
By the way, 2 times.
Yeah, I think, and one of the important things I think is the whole how we tied the audio to the way the game plays. So, for example, when the passengers, the speed at which the passengers hop onto a train, that was all synchronized with the audio. So before that happened, we could change the speed. We could fiddle around with the speed and figure out how fast a passenger hops on and off. We can use that to make to differentiate gameplay between different cities and stuff like that. But then once it was synchronized with the audio, if Rich made an audio change, it would affect the gameplay. If we made a gameplay change, it would affect the audio. So we lost some versatility there.
So really quick, some interpersonal stuff. This was a big part of our process because we're different. Different skill sets, different work approach. So Peter's more of a categorize, organize, and finish kind of guy, and I think he was more set on feature control.
Yeah, I like to know where things are at. I think
that's fair enough. I was more like tweak, fiddle, and experiment, feature creep as like a means to an end. Time zones, which actually didn't turn out to be that big of a problem.
Yeah, we've only got about 4 hours time difference, but Rich works quite late, so it worked out well.
Language was actually really hard for a while, especially just doing like Slack chat. Learning all the Kiwi lingo was really difficult.
Yeah, instant message is just awful with people you don't know
like,
that
what
well.
And then also like just our knowledge base, like what the WTF is an arpeggio?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that Rich intimately knew as an audio developer and didn't realize that ordinary people don't know these things.
Yeah. So we tried a novel approach in order to better understand each other. I went to New Zealand and we got to know each other a little bit, and I played with Pete's kids, which was probably the most important part of
it's
development.
funny. I just have to say, I sing to I sing to them every night. Baba, Black Sheep, that kind of stuff. The one night that Rich was there as well and sang next to me to the kids, I'm like, oh wow, I sound really bad, don't I?
Sorry.
So hopefully they were young enough
fine.
that they've forgotten about that now. But anyway.
So this is pretty much where the audio is now, just to kind of put things in perspective. Thanks.
Just go right all the way.
Yeah, don't worry about any of this data stuff.
And it's now, we just released on iOS and Android yesterday. So I think it was iPads edited choice in the States. So yay. So yeah.
Yes, we are on iOS and Android.
Yes. Finally.
As of like today or yesterday.
Something. Yeah.
Woohoo! Thank you guys.
Yeah.
If you want to talk to us, we'll be around. We'd love to talk more about this. We're nerds.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working this for 3.5 years. I don't want to stop now, right?
Thank you.
Cheers.